February 12th, 1942, northern shore of Lake Ladoga Leningrad front. The cold that morning was the kind that killed without needing a bullet, 29 degrees, with a dry metallic wind drifting across the snowpack and the faint rumble of distant artillery echoing over the ice. The eastern sky had only begun to pale when Junior Lieutenant Pavel Andreev pushed through the tree line, boots sinking into the crusted snow as he approached the forward winter encampment of the 229th Rifle Regiment. He had seen deserted trenches before, ruined outposts, abandoned positions, left behind in the chaos of retreat, but never anything like this. No voices, no fires, no sentries, no movement, just the wind sliding between rows of silent tents. He stopped at the perimeter, breath crystallizing in the half-light, watching the horses beside the supply shed shift anxiously in their traces. Their ears flicked at something he couldn't hear, their warm breath drifting like thin smoke into the frozen air. Horses never lie. Something had happened here. Something fast, something quiet. Andreev crouched, brushing gloved fingers across the snow. What he saw made his stomach tighten. A line of boot prints, dozens of them, marched toward the camp. Perfect stride distance, perfect direction. Nothing strange, until they didn't continue. The tracks simply ended, like the men walked forward, then vanished into thin air. He knelt deeper, testing the snow with his hand. No drift, no wind-blown accumulation, no scuff marks. The surface was smooth, untouched. The men hadn't doubled back, they hadn't run, they hadn't been dragged. They had just stopped. A faint orange glow caught his eye, a lantern half buried near a snow mound. He lifted it, still warm, dropped very recently. Someone had been here no more than an hour ago. Then came the rifle, a Mosin Nagant, bolt frozen halfway open, lying in a shallow depression of snow. No blood, no damage, no tracks around it. A rifle abandoned in perfect conditions was more alarming than bodies. Bodies meant a fight. Abandoned rifles meant something worse: disorder or panic. As dawn finally lifted over the tree line, the scale of the silence revealed itself. Tents, arranged in perfect formation, footlockers aligned in rows, mess pots still half filled with frozen kasha, even a deck of German playing cards lay scattered on a crate, as if a card game had been interrupted mid-hand. But the regiment over 200 men was gone. At 07:10, Sergeant Yuri Malenkov appeared through the frost with a field phone handset clutched in his hands, its cord cut cleanly, as if severed by a blade. He looked pale, even in the cold. "Comrade Lieutenant, no one is answering. Not from the trenches, not from the listening post, nothing." Andreev pointed at a patch of snow ahead. "Look there." Malenkov crouched beside the tracks that marched confidently across the snow for several meters, then ended as abruptly as if the men had walked off a cliff. "Could be drifting snow," Malenkov started. "No drifting," Andreev said sharply. "Wind's been dead all night." Malenkov swallowed. "Then what happened to them?" Andreev didn't answer. His eyes moved over the orderly, silent camp. Everything left behind was neat, disciplined, untouched. No overturned crates, no shell casings, no sign of German attack, no signs of retreat, just absence. And an absence this clean, this sterile, was wrong in a way that made his bones cold. At 10:40, the quiet was broken by the distant rumble of truck engines approaching from the south. A column of NKVD special detachment vehicles rolled into the camp, 3 GAZ trucks, and a snow tractor hauling a mobile radio station. Their arrival sent a ripple through the air, the kind that follows authority arriving at a place where answers are needed. From the lead truck stepped Captain Maxim Sidorov, 4th Directorate, wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat, Tokarev pistol at his side. His eyes swept the silent camp, with the practiced calm of a man who had seen more disappearances and betrayals than most men survived. "You found it like this?" Sidorov asked. "Yes, Comrade Captain," Andreev replied. "At dawn, no survivors, no bodies." Sidorov nodded slowly, too slowly. "Then we treat this as counterintelligence." His men dispersed wordlessly, trained efficiency replacing curiosity. They found everything Andreev had found, and more. A samovar, still warm under a crust of ice. A supply sled half loaded, Rope still looped as if someone had dropped it mid-task. Boot prints that split into several directions and then inexplicably merged again minutes later. A half-written letter ending in mid-sentence. Every detail pointed to something sudden but human, something real but confusing, something that happened fast but without a fight. When Sidorov ordered, "Burn the tents," Andreev's reaction was immediate. Burn them. But this entire camp is evidence. Sidorov stepped close, voice low. Evidence becomes rumor. Rumor becomes panic. Panic becomes advantage for the enemy. He held Andreev's gaze. This regiment did not disappear. It redeployed. Do you understand? Andreev swallowed hard. Yes, comrade captain, because he understood exactly what that meant. The disappearance wasn't just a mystery. It was now a state secret. And whatever truly happened in those early hours of February 12th had already begun to sink beneath the layers of bureaucracy and war. But the truth was still out there, somewhere beyond the tree line, somewhere past the first bend of forest where the tracks had led. And Andreev knew the search had only just begun. February 12th, 1942, 13:20 hours. Northern tree line of the abandoned 229th Rifle Regiment camp. Snow begins falling again. The dry, drifting kind that erases detail without ever feeling heavy. The NKVD detachment works in practiced, almost clinical silence, photographing tent rows, tagging discarded equipment, sketching boot patterns in notebooks stiff with frost. Though their movements are sharp and disciplined, Andreev can feel it. Even these men, conditioned for suspicion and secrecy, are unsettled by the unnatural order of the emptiness. Too clean, too intact, too fast. Sidorov motions for Andreev to follow as he heads toward the northern perimeter. The wind snaps at loose webbing on their coats, carrying the distant creak of ice, shifting somewhere deep on the lake. They pass a shallow trench line, half hidden under snow. 2 ammo crates lie beside it, lids open, contents untouched. As they approach the edge of the forest, Sidorov stops without a word, staring downward. Tracks, 2 sets, leading away from the camp, not toward German lines, but inland, deeper into the dense pine forest. The prints are crisp, not melted or drifted, clear heel strike, even spacing. Moderate weight bearing, no signs of panic, no overlap from men running or pushing past each other. Whoever left these tracks was calm, methodical. Possibly 2 soldiers on watch rotation, possibly runners, possibly something else, but all within the realm of human explanation. 2 men, Andreev asks. At most, Sidorov replies, but look further. They follow the tracks 20 meters, then 30. The forest absorbs sound, the snow swallowing their footsteps into muted crunches. Ahead, the 2 clear lines of prints split, one veering left, one veering right. Not strange in itself. Soldiers often diverge during patrol, but then more prints appear from the right, and from the left, and from behind a fallen stump, and then a dozen more sets suddenly join the first 2, converging toward a thicker cluster of trees. In seconds, the forest floor becomes a maze of diverging, intersecting, and looping footprints. Some patterns are logical, a patrol changing direction, someone circling a tree, a sentry doubling back. But others raise brows, boot prints that turn sharply mid-step, as if the wearer pivoted repeatedly. Prints that disappear under untouched snow, trails that begin without any preceding footprints. Could be drifting snow, a young NKVD trooper offers nervously. No drifting, Andreev states again. Not enough wind, not enough movement. Sidorov nods once agreement, not praise. They push deeper. The trees grow taller, older. The shadows sharpen. The temperature drops another several degrees. Enough for frost to form on Sidorov's moustache in minutes. 20 more meters, and they find the first object, a Soviet telegraika jacket sleeve, torn nearly in a straight line. No blood, no fraying, just a clean tear through thick quilted fabric. Something human could have done that, a snag on a metal sled runner, or a hard yank in panic, but the absence of blood suggests the man wasn't injured. 2 meters away lies a PPSH-41, safety on, drum attached, no signs of discharge, not dropped. Sidorov mutters, examining the ground, placed. Andreev exhales slowly. Soldiers under stress sometimes abandoned gear, but not in perfect condition. Safety engaged, barrel clean. Why would men leave a loaded submachine gun in the middle of the forest, Andreev asks. Sidorov doesn't answer immediately. He crouches, studying the snow. Finally, he says, because they intended to come back for it. The implication hangs heavy. Something interrupted them between placing the weapon and retrieving it. Something fast, something chaotic, something completely human. A sudden shell burst, a shout from a commander, a panicked order in the dark. At 14:05 hours, the forest tightens around them. The pines stand closer together, branches interlocking overhead like black ribs. The light dims to a grey twilight even though it is still early afternoon. Andreev feels the cold deepening in a way he recognizes the kind that precedes a whiteout blizzard. Temperatures, pressure, and humidity all shifting. He had felt this in Tikhvin before sudden storms swallowed entire patrols. Then they reach a small clearing perfectly circular, several paces across. No tracks enter it, no tracks leave it, just one straight line of footprints leading directly through the center, disappearing into unbroken snow on the far side. Andreev kneels, examining spacing and depth. These strides, longer than walking, shorter than running, a man under stress, Sidorov replies, but still orderly, still controlled. Then he kneels and brushes aside snow near the last visible print. Something hard and solid is embedded beneath. He digs it out carefully. A wool glove, inside it, rigid and frozen, is a human hand, severed clean, not chewed, not torn by shrapnel, removed by force or a sharp tool in chaos. A very real, very human kind of horror. Andreev staggers backward. My God. Sidorov wraps the hand back in the glove, face unreadable. One man was injured, badly, likely frostbitten severely. Someone may have amputated in the field. We've seen worse at the Volkhov front. It is plausible, grotesque but grounded in wartime necessity. By 15:20 the sky begins to dim again, not from sunset, but from heavy cloud cover thickening. Another storm building. If it hits, it will erase the entire forest floor in minutes. The NKVD begin preparing to return before conditions worsen. As they emerge from the deeper woods back toward the outskirts of the camp, Andreev stops cold. New tracks, large, wide, not animal-human boots, but heavily loaded, deeper than any prints they had seen earlier. Perhaps soldiers carrying equipment, perhaps men retreating under pressure, perhaps someone running after disorientation set in. And all of them lead back toward the camp, toward the exact spot where everything had begun. Sidorov stares at the prints. These were not here this morning. Andreev inhales sharply. Then someone walked through here recently, after we entered the forest, or several men. Sidorov says, from the missing regiment possible. Andreev's pulse quickens, because the tracks prove one thing. At least one group of soldiers from the missing regiment had survived long enough to move after dawn. Men who had been alive, somewhere in the forest, in the hours after the disappearances. And that changed everything. February 12th, 1942, 16:40 hours. The snow thickens into a fine curtain as the NKVD detachment regroups at the edge of the silent camp. Sidorov orders the men to gather anything that could reconstruct the regiment's final hours maps. Scribbled notes, half-burned papers, field logs, small details that mean nothing alone, but together might form a pattern. In a war defined by chaos, patterns are the closest thing to truth. Andreev moves through the tents, one by one. Inside the command post, he finds the regimental operations, maps still pinned to a makeshift wooden table, positions marked in pencil, arrows showing patrol routes, small notes in the colonel's handwriting. He sees nothing unusual at first glance, but the last entry is strange. Night movement, 02:15. Prepare for possible redeployment. No arrow, no direction, no confirmation signature, just a time, a hint of intent without explanation. He steps into the open, showing it to Sidorov. The captain studies the line for several seconds. This is not an order. It's a reminder. Reminder for what? For an order someone expected to receive. Sidorov answers, but never did, or never completed writing. The implications are sharp. If a redeployment order was expected at 02:15 and communication lines were cut sometime between midnight and dawn, the regiment might have acted on incomplete information or guessed the intention. In wartime, that was often enough to doom hundreds. The NKVD radio operator calls out. He has recovered a fragment of a signal intercept log from the regimental station. The sheet is smudged, partly frozen, but 3 entries remain legible. 0157 static interference. 0203 possible message from Corps HQ, unreadable. 14 lines, unstable, anticipating transmission. Then nothing. Sidorov rubs his forehead. If they believed they were about to be ordered into a night march, they could have assembled and moved before confirming. Andreev shakes his head. But the camp is too orderly. No signs of rushed departure. Unless the officers believed they were moving only a short distance, Sidorov counters, or believed the Germans were closing in. In that case, they'd want quiet, discipline, perfect order, no lanterns, no shouting. It makes sense, painfully human sense. As the light dims further, the recovered tracks become harder to read. Andreev and 2 NKVD troopers work quickly, marking prints with sticks and strips of cloth before snow can bury them. Sidorov examines each grouping with a detective's eye. These prints are deeper, he notes. Men carrying full kits. He points to another cluster. These are lighter, possibly wounded or support personnel. And these, he pauses, crouching, running. Someone broke discipline here. Andreev follows the direction of the running tracks. They lead away from the primary mass, veering sharply southeast toward the old logging road. That road connects to 2 locations, German forward patrol areas, and an unmarked depression near the lake where snowdrifts conceal unstable ground and thin ice. The path splits again further up. At least 3 small groups diverged into different directions, a textbook sign of night disorientation. Men losing their bearing, order collapsing quietly. Malenkov joins them, breathing hard. We found something else. He leads them to a cluster of low pines. A half-collapsed shovel lies nearby. Under the snow, the men dig until they uncover a thin but long trench, shallow, hastily made, perhaps intended as a temporary slit trench or emergency cover. Inside it, they find a spent flare casing, several PPSH cartridges, frozen blood droplets, and a single leather strap torn from a rucksack. A firefight brief, very brief. Andreev frowns. But no bodies. The Germans would remove their own, Malenkov says, and possibly ours, if they wanted information. Or, Sidorov adds, there were no bodies because the fight didn't finish here. It moved. The snow can hide everything in minutes. A small skirmish at night can scatter a regiment like birds startled into different directions. Sidorov kneels beside the trench wall, scraping off fresh snow until he reaches older, compacted layers. He stops. Look at the compaction. Andreev studies it. The lower snow has been crushed by weight, many boots pressing in, but unevenly spaced. Chaotic. Panic, Andreev asks. No, Sidorov replies. Not panic. Confusion. Confusion kills faster than bullets in winter warfare. At 1750, they move toward the lake's edge, following the deepest set of tracks. The cold intensifies sharply. Wind rises in quick, slicing gusts. Andreev smells a faint mineral scent, the smell that precedes shifting ice. Ahead, the shoreline reveals fractures in the surface, splits, pressure ridges, a place where movement on the ice at night could be disastrous. Then they find the first true sign of catastrophe, a collapsed section of snow-covered ice, frozen over again, but clearly the remnant of a break. Around it lie a torn scarf, a broken entrenching tool, and a boot, Soviet issue, size 43, frozen upright. Sidorov crouches, examining the ice edges. This collapse happened within the last day. The cold refroze it, but not cleanly. Someone stepped here, likely multiple men. Could men have fallen through? Yes, Sidorov says grimly, and quickly, in darkness, in a snowstorm. Absolutely. But the number of missing men was far too large for a single ice collapse. Andreev looks back toward the forest. If some fell here, the others might have scattered deeper inland. 3 directions, Sidorov says. pointing. Panic radiates, groups splinter. Officers lose control, runners get lost. By dawn, they could have been spread across kilometers. Snow covered everything. It is not supernatural. It is not strange. It is war. A regiment can collapse from within, silently, under the pressure of cold confusion and miscommunication. As they prepare to return to camp, the snow thickens further. The current storm could erase all their findings within hours. But one thing is now clear to all of them. The 29th Rifle Regiment did not vanish. It broke, quietly, fatally, humanly. And the hardest part, the reconstruction of their final movements, has only begun. February 12th, 1942, 18:55 hours. Tree line, west of the collapsed ice shelf. The storm is beginning to settle into its full shape. Wind sharpening, snow thickening, visibility collapsing into a narrow tunnel of grey. Andreev pulls his scarf higher, following Sidorov along a shallow ridge that overlooks the western edge of the forest. They have less than an hour before the landscape becomes unreadable. Every sign, every trace, every clue left by the regiment will be swallowed. Their boots crunch over a stretch of snow, so tightly packed that it feels like stone. Here, Sidorov kneels and runs his gloved hand across the surface. Do you see the difference? Andreev nods. This snow is compacted by many men moving fast. The pattern is unmistakable, hundreds of overlapping prints. Compressed into a broad path, the regiment did not stand still or rest here. They moved, quickly, purposefully. The direction is clear, deeper into the trees, away from the lake, away from the ice collapse, where the first casualties likely occurred. As they proceed, the snow thins briefly under a patch of bare branches. Something metallic glints. Malenkov digs it out a standard issue canteen, with a hairline crack, still wet inside. Water that hasn't frozen at 30 degrees C means it was dropped minutes before freezing temperatures struck hard. They were here shortly after dawn, Sidorov confirms, a group of at least 20. A few meters farther, they find 3 shell casings, Mosin Nagant, brass, lightly tarnished. Fired recently, they form no pattern, no defensive line. More like warning shots than an engagement. A soldier firing into the darkness, perhaps shouting for the others. In heavy snow, a single muzzle flash can look like an attack. A nervous regiment can unravel from one misinterpreted sound. Night confusion. Sidorov mutters. A single soldier fires. The line shifts. Order breaks. Andreev had seen it happen before. Whiteout conditions erase depth. A lantern flicker looks like a flare. A shadow becomes an enemy patrol. Panic spreads before officers can regain control. In darkness, men do not fear bullets, they fear the unknown just beyond their sight. The forest thickens abruptly ahead. The trees grow older here, trunks wide enough to shelter whole squads from wind. Under one such trunk, they find a cluster of items, a rolled map case, a shattered wristwatch, 2 ration tins, and a blood-stained bandage. The blood is frozen, but recent, still dark, not browned. Someone was wounded, Andreev says quietly. A small wound, Sidorov replies, but bad enough to slow them. A slowed soldier can pull an entire column apart. Men wait, others push ahead. Groups separate, officers lose track. In storms like this, fragmentation becomes death. Beyond the tree line, they discover tracks splitting into 3 clean directions, one heading northwest toward German patrol zones, one heading south back toward the camp, and one heading northeast deeper into the wilderness. This is the moment, Andreev realizes, where the regiment effectively ceased to be a regiment. At least 3 distinct groups now existed, each confused, each moving without full information, each convinced they were following the safest route. This, Sidorov says, gesturing at the split, is the anatomy of collapse. They follow the southernmost trail, the one leading back toward the camp. It's thinner, perhaps 15 or 20 men. The prints show signs of exhaustion, deeper heel marks, uneven strides, the dragging patterns of men near physical collapse. No disorder, no fighting, just fatigue, the kind that kills in winter as easily as enemy bullets. 50 meters further, they find another artifact, a torn field order tucked beneath a log. Most of the text is ruined, But 3 words remain: enemy movement suspected. This was the trigger. Someone, an officer or a sentry, believed the Germans were approaching. In the darkness, in rising wind, this single belief could send an entire regiment into silent, disciplined withdrawal. No shouting, no lanterns, quiet movement only. And if a blizzard struck at that exact moment, the line could break entirely without anyone realizing it. Near the top of a low hill, they find the final piece, a fallen signal flare pistol, embedded in the snow. The chamber is empty, 1 round fired. The flare case earlier suggests something. The flare may have been launched, seen by another group, misinterpreted as a signal of danger. Each group reacting to incomplete cues, human mistakes cascading. As the light fades, Sidorov looks over the hill toward the forest. A regiment this size doesn't disappear, he says softly. It dissolves, quietly, in the dark, in fear, in cold. Andreev exhales slowly, the truth settling like frost inside his chest. No monsters, he says. No mysteries. No, Sidorov answers. Just exhaustion, weather, fear, and the silence of officers receiving no orders. Behind them, the storm finally hits full force. The tracks they have spent hours uncovering blur instantly. Another 5 minutes, and they will be erased completely. Andreev watches the snow swallow the regiment's last footsteps, and realizes something. They are not looking at something inexplicable. They are looking at something brutally human. The 229th Rifle Regiment did not walk into oblivion. It walked into the storm. February 13th, 1942. In 10 hours, NKVD Field Command Tent, northern shore of Lake Ladoga. Barely a few hours of grey daylight have passed since the storm buried every remaining footprint, every trench outline, every clue burned into the snow the previous day. The camp now looks like an untouched plateau, the forest sealed behind a white curtain. Where 200 men once lived and moved, the wind now moves alone. Inside the command tent, a kerosene lamp casts a weak amber glow over a battered wooden table piled with documents, half-frozen operations logs, torn maps, flare casings, blood-stained cloth, and sketches of track patterns drawn by NKVD field photographers. Andreev sits stiffly beside Sergeant Malenkov, both of them still numb from cold and fatigue. Across the table, Captain Sidorov prepares the formal report. His handwriting is neat, methodical, almost detached, as if the more clinical the tone, the less dangerous the truth becomes. The report begins with objective facts. Between 02:00 and 04:30 hours, the 229th Rifle Regiment likely executed an unsanctioned night maneuver due to perceived threat of enemy encirclement. It is a careful sentence, true enough to withstand scrutiny, ambiguous enough to hide disastrous error. Andreev watches Sidorov write the next line. Communication lines suffered intermittent failure due to atmospheric interference. Also true, but the missing detail that the regiment acted on incomplete information is not written. Some truths belong to the snow. Sidorov pauses, tapping the pen against the table. Lieutenant, he says without looking up, tell me again your interpretation of the 3-track branches. Andreev straightens. The primary group moved northeast, likely aiming for the reserve trenches near Hill 43. The second group attempted to return to the camp, possibly to re-establish communication. The third group headed northwest, wrong direction, likely due to night disorientation. Human error, Sidorov says. Yes, Andreev replies. Human, not enemy action. Malenkov, hands trembling slightly from cold, adds, Comrade Captain, we found no German shell casings, no footprints, no spoor, no boot nails, nothing. Sidorov nods. Then the regiment acted alone. He finishes the next section of the report. No confirmed evidence of enemy engagement. Another carefully neutral line, accurate but incomplete. They did find shell casings, but they were from Soviet rifles, likely fired in confusion. To write that would invite questions. Questions invite audits. Audits invite blame. And blame can ruin careers more efficiently than German bullets. The tent flap snaps open, letting in a rush of cold. An NKVD courier enters, breath steaming. Comrade Captain, transmission from front headquarters. Sidorov takes the paper, reads it quickly, folds it. His expression doesn't change. The disappearance is now classified under Directive 419. Nothing leaves this tent without approval. No speculation, no mention of miscommunication, no mention of fragmentation. Andreev feels his stomach tighten. They're burying it. They are preserving operational stability. Sidorov corrects. A regiment disappearing without German involvement is worse than a defeat. It is disorder. He writes the next line. It is probable that the regiment, in attempting to avoid perceived enemy movement, redeployed into the forest during a developing snowstorm. This line is true, painfully so, and yet it erases all nuance, all detail, all human suffering of the night. Sidorov turns to Andreev. Your notes will remain with us. Your statements will be limited to what is written here. Andreev clenches his jaw. But the families. The families will be told what they need to hear. Sidorov interrupts. That their sons died honourably, resisting a German attempt to break the Ladoga line. But that never happened. Andreev whispers. Sidorov looks him directly in the eye. A rare thing for a man like him. Lieutenant, history is not built on what happened. It is built on what must be understood. Andreev's breath catches. He finally asks the question burning in him since dawn, Comrade Captain. Do you believe the regiment simply broke apart? Sidorov folds the report neatly. Weather, miscommunication, fatigue, fear, all of these kill, sometimes more efficiently than bullets. He lights a cigarette, watching the smoke drift upward. A whiteout blizzard can erase a battalion. A single wrong order can scatter a regiment. A misinterpreted flare can start a retreat no commander ever intended. A patch of thin ice can swallow 10 men in seconds. He exhales slowly. Nothing supernatural, just war. The simplicity of it makes the truth heavier, not lighter. At 11:20 hours, an NKVD photographer brings in the last set of prints, taken before the storm fully engulfed the area. They show the split in the trails, 3 branching directions, carved into the snow like veins of a shattered formation. Sidorov studies them for a long moment. These, he says, are the last traces of the 229th Rifle Regiment. Where do the trails end? Andreev asks. In the storm. Sidorov replies, and beyond that, somewhere we will never find. He signs the final line of the report, cause pending, location of personnel unknown. The most honest words in the entire document. Outside, the white wind rises again. The snow continues its slow erasure. The men pack their things. The trucks warm their engines. And Andreev realizes something bitter and undeniable. The truth of that night will not be found in the forest. It will not be found in the tracks or the trenches or the ice. The truth will be found in the 3 possible explanations, all human, all tragic, that the war will never acknowledge publicly. But the real accounting, the real attempt to understand has not yet begun. February 14th, 1942. 6:40 hours. The storm has finally died. The landscape around the former campsite of the 229th Rifle Regiment is now a featureless plain, smooth and white, as if nothing had ever existed beneath it. The forest stands silent, the lake lies unmoving, and the regiment 1,200 trained men has vanished more completely than any battlefield defeat could achieve. Andreev stands with Sidorov beside the frozen shoreline, each man quietly accepting that the search is no longer a search, but an act of memorialization. The truth is gone, buried under meters of drifting snow. What remains are clues, fragments, impressions enough for only 3 possible explanations. No supernatural force, no legends, no impossible creatures, only war, weather, and human misjudgment. Sidorov folds his coat tighter and begins listing the hypotheses, not as an NKVD officer delivering a verdict, but as a soldier trying to make sense of the disaster. Andreev listens, every word slotting into place with painful clarity. Hypothesis 1, the whiteout collapse. The first and simplest explanation is also the most deadly. A whiteout blizzard hit during the night, reducing visibility to near zero and erasing depth perception. Soldiers in such conditions experience loss of horizon. where the sky blends with ground until even trained men cannot tell direction. If the regiment received a warning about possible German movement, even a false one, the officers would have chosen to move silently and quickly. No shouts, no lanterns, just hand signals and disciplined withdrawal. In that environment, a single mistake becomes catastrophic. A platoon veers off course, a squad misreads the terrain, a company overcorrects, assuming they're following the main body. Within minutes, the regiment fractures into multiple streams. Men fall behind, others march into tree lines, some drift toward the lake, where thin ice hides beneath powder snow. The tracks they found diverging, looping, merging all support this hypothesis. The abandoned PPS, the half-written letter, the amputated hand, the frozen blood, these are not signs of supernatural terror, but the artifacts of a regiment fighting weather harder than any enemy. In temperatures near 30 degrees, frostbite sets in within minutes. Disorientation follows. Even experienced soldiers can wander in circles until collapse. A whiteout storm is silent. It does not roar, it erases, and it kills without leaving bodies behind. Hypothesis 2. A misinterpreted order and night redeployment. The second hypothesis centers on the incomplete operations note. U15. Prepare for movement. If communication lines were unstable, and the field logs show they were the regiment, may have believed a redeployment order was imminent. No commander wants to wait for German paratroopers or infiltrators to appear. So the officers might have chosen initiative form. The column, pack gear silently, extinguish fires, prepare to move, a logical decision in frontline conditions. But if the actual order never arrived, and the regiment moved without confirmation, their silent departure explains the camp's unnatural tidiness. Everything left behind was left with intent, not panic. The fatal variable occurs next. Someone fires a warning shot. Someone sees a flare from another group. Someone believes an encirclement is forming. Multiple groups interpret signals differently. A regiment in motion at night, especially across forested terrain, is fragile. Lines can break. Signals are lost. Officers lose contact with companies. Companies lose contact with platoons. In 15 minutes, a well-trained regiment can dissolve into 5 or 6 isolated columns, each believing it is the main body. The evidence found scattered gear, brief firefights, hasty trenches all match the behaviour of units trying to regain orientation in darkness. No supernatural disappearance, no mass abduction, just a regiment executing an order that never existed. And the NKVD's desire to bury this version is clear. A regiment lost due to miscommunication is a political disaster. A regiment lost to German pressure is easier to explain. Hypothesis 3. German harassment plus thin ice equals fatal chain reaction. The third hypothesis is the harshest, that German night patrols or harassment fire triggered a chain reaction. It need not be a large attack, a single flare, a burst of MG-34 fire from afar, or a probing squad could have caused a ripple of fear in a regiment already preparing to move. Soldiers might have run toward what they believed were safer positions, some south, some east, some toward the lake. The collapsed ice shelf they discovered is critical evidence. Fresh, refrozen quickly, edges fractured by weight. Even 10 men stepping on thin ice can break it. In darkness, with blowing snow, entire platoons have vanished this way in the Leningrad winters. A firefight near the tree line could scatter soldiers in all directions. German forces did not need to destroy the regiment. They only needed to spook it weather, and terrain did the rest. Once the first men fell through the ice, panic would spread silently. Men run, officers lose control, columns split apart. Dozens die in the water, bodies dragged under by freezing layers. Dozens flee into the forest. Dozens more collapse in snowdrifts. By dawn, the regiment doesn't exist anymore. Not as a unit, not as a body of men, just fragments scattered across kilometres. This hypothesis fits all evidence: shell casings, the torn sleeve, partial trenches, and above all, the tracks heading back toward the camp survivors trying to return. The official verdict: none, not one, not ever. By the time Sidorov's report reaches Leningrad Front headquarters, it has already been rewritten. The regiment resisted German encirclement and was lost in heroic night combat. No mention of miscommunication, no mention of dispersal, no mention of thin ice. A convenient lie for a war that needs heroes, not avoidable tragedies. Andreev stands at the lake's edge at dusk, snow falling in slow drifting flakes. He looks at the empty horizon and understands the truth that will never appear in any archive. A regiment does not need monsters to disappear. It only needs darkness, winter, exhaustion, a few wrong signals, and the silence of a frozen lake. 1,200 men did not vanish mysteriously. They vanished humanly. Their traces will melt, their footsteps will fade, and the war will continue without them.